The Forbidden Feast. Vikela crouched low in the dense undergrowth, her breathing steady but her mind racing. Her sharp golden eyes focused on the impossible sight before her, a human, sitting casually by a crackling fire, tearing into the roasted flesh of the most feared predator on her planet. The Zarvok. The massive beast lay motionless beside him, its thick, armored hide cut open with terrifying precision. Its flesh, known for being poisonous to all known species, was now sizzling over the fire, releasing a rich, smoky aroma into the cold night air. Vikala's heart pounded against her chest. This couldn't be real. The Zarvok was the apex predator, the unstoppable nightmare of the wilds. It was not hunted. It was not eaten. It hunted and devoured anything foolish enough to enter its domain. Yet this human, this fragile, soft-skinned creature, was sitting there, feasting on it like it was nothing more than a common meal. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her blade, her instincts screaming at her to run. But she didn't. She had to understand. How had he done this? The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the human's face. He was calm, too calm. His kind were supposed to be weak, barely capable of survival on their own. They relied on technology, on numbers, on machines. But this one had killed a Zarvok with his bare hands. Her mind raced with questions. What kind of creature was this human? Then, suddenly, his head turned. Golden brown eyes locked onto hers in an instant. Vikala froze. The human smirked. "You gonna watch all night, or do you want a bite?" She almost gasped. His voice was calm, almost amused, as if this situation wasn't completely insane, as if eating the deadliest creature on the planet was nothing but a casual dinner. She remained hidden, gripping her blade tighter. Did he know she was watching this whole time? If so, why didn't he react? The human tore off another chunk of meat and bit into it, chewing slowly. No signs of distress, no convulsions. He was alive. Vikela couldn't understand it. Zarvok flesh was toxic, not just to Xelvians, but to every species ever recorded. Even a drop of its blood in the system could cause immediate organ failure. And yet, this human was eating it without hesitation. Was he immune? Was he insane? Was he even real? Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to retreat before this human turned his gaze into something more dangerous. But another part of her, the warrior inside her, refused to back down. She took a slow step forward. The human's smirk deepened, but he didn't reach for a weapon. He just sat there, tearing another piece of meat off the bone. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows over the scene. Vikala spoke at last. "You should be dead." The human chuckled. "People say that a lot." She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer, her gaze flicking to the dead Zarvok beside him. It wasn't just dead. It had been butchered skillfully. The cuts were clean, precise, almost surgical. This was not the work of a desperate fool who got lucky. This was the work of a predator. Vikala felt something she had never felt before. Not fear, not anger. Uncertainty. She had faced death before, fought in wars, seen warriors rise and fall. But this human was something else entirely. She pointed her blade at him. "How did you kill it?" The human sighed, as if the answer was obvious. He wiped his hands on his pants and leaned back against a rock. "Simple. I hunted it." Hunted it. She almost laughed. No one hunted the Zarvok. No one hunted something that was born to kill. He must have seen the disbelief in her eyes because he shrugged. "You all make it sound so mystical. The great Zarvok, ruler of the wilds. It's just an animal." Her grip tightened on her blade. "It is no ordinary animal." He nodded. "Neither am I." The fire crackled between them. The jungle was silent. The usual sounds of the night, the distant howls, the rustling leaves, the low growls of unseen creatures were gone. They feared this place now. They feared him. Vikala stared at the human, her warrior instincts warring with her logic. Everything about this was wrong. Humans were supposed to be prey, yet here was one eating the greatest predator her world had ever known. And the worst part, he looked like he enjoyed it. A cold realization crept into her mind. If this human could do this to a Zarvok, what else was his kind capable of? For the first time in her life, Vikala wasn't sure if she was standing before an ally or the deadliest threat her people had ever faced. The human met her gaze, still holding that infuriating smirk. "So you gonna keep staring, or are you ready to learn how to hunt?" The fire flickered. The jungle held its breath. And Vikala had no idea if she had just met her greatest teacher or her greatest enemy. A predator like no other. Vikala didn't move. She stood at the edge of the firelight, her blade still gripped in her hand, but her mind was a storm of confusion. She had faced death before, stood before enemies twice her size, fought creatures with razor-sharp fangs and armor-thick hides. But this was something different. This was a human, a being that her people had barely considered worth fearing, and yet he sat there devouring the deadliest beast on the planet, as if it were a simple meal. Jack Mercer, the human, met her gaze with an easy confidence. His golden brown eyes reflected the firelight, but behind them was something deeper, something unnerving. Predators didn't just fight with strength, they fought with their minds. And Vikala was beginning to wonder if she had just found the most dangerous one of all. She took another step forward, her sharp gaze never leaving him. "You are lying." Jack raised an eyebrow, tearing another piece of meat from the roasted Zarvok's bone. "Am I?" She clenched her jaw. "The Zarvok is untouchable. Its flesh is poison. Its mind is that of a killer, ancient, instinctive, relentless. It cannot be hunted." Jack swallowed his bite, then wiped his hands on his pants before leaning back against the rock. Sounds like someone never tried. Vikala's fingers twitched. The arrogance, the disrespect for a creature that had ruled her world long before her people even mastered the hunt. "You don't understand," she said, voice low, controlled. "The Zarvok is not just an animal. It is a force. It cannot be killed so easily." Jack let out a short chuckle. "Oh, I wouldn't say it was easy." She narrowed her eyes. "Tell me, then, how did you do it?" Jack sighed, tossing the bone into the fire. It cracked and hissed in the heat. He stretched his arms before sitting forward, elbows on his knees. "You want the short version, or the interesting one?" Vikala hesitated. She shouldn't be here. She should kill this fool for his insult against the greatest predator of her world. She should return to her people and report what she had seen. But something inside her wanted to know. She stepped closer, lowering her blade slightly. Jack grinned. "All right. Story time then." "The hunt. It started 3 days ago," Jack began, looking up at the stars. "I was out in the wilds, low on supplies, and in need of food. Your people, they don't exactly leave a warm welcome for humans around here." Vikala stiffened at the unspoken accusation that Selvian Empire had long dismissed humans as nothing more than an expanding nuisance, troublesome, reckless, too bold for their own good. That didn't mean they weren't watched. Jack continued. "I was tracking a herd of horned grazers. Looked easy enough. Figured I could take one down, set up camp." He smirked. Then the wind changed. Vikala's stomach tensed. A wind change meant one thing in the wilds. "You were being hunted," she murmured. Jack nodded. "Yeah. I didn't see it, didn't hear it, but I felt it. That pressure, like something was already choosing how to kill me." She knew that feeling well. The Zarvok's gaze was like death breathing down your spine. Even the strongest warriors froze when they felt it. Jack's voice was casual, like he was telling a campfire story. "So, I did what any smart guy would do. I started running." Vikala's brow furrowed. "You ran." "Not away," Jack corrected. "I ran toward the cliffs." She sucked in a breath. "You led it to the high ground." Jack pointed at her. Bingo. It wanted me on open ground, somewhere it could charge, get me in one clean strike. But I figured, why fight on its terms? Vikala had to admit, this was not the strategy of a fool. Most who encountered a Zarvok either froze or fought. Jack had done neither. He had changed the battlefield. Jack leaned forward, voice lowering. It stalked me for hours, never showing itself, just waiting, testing. It knew I knew it was there. That's what made it fun for it. Vikala shivered. The Zarvok was a creature that enjoyed the hunt. It played with its prey. The stronger the target, the longer it took before it went for the kill. Jack grinned. When I finally saw it, I knew I had about 3 seconds to make a decision. 3 seconds to either die or win. She swallowed. And what did you do? Jack's grin widened. I let it charge. Vikala's heart pounded. That is suicide. He shrugged. Only if you don't know what you're doing. Her grip on her weapon tightened. And what did you know that no other warrior before you did? Jack's expression darkened slightly, his casual air shifting into something colder, sharper. I knew that the Zarvok is an apex predator, he said. But so am I. Silence. The fire crackled, the wind whispering through the trees. At the last second, I dropped low. Jack continued. Rolled under its strike. It overshot, tried to turn, but I was already on its back. Vikala's eyes widened. Impossible. Jack made a sharp motion with his hands, took my knife, went for the weak point at the base of the skull. One clean stab. He snapped his fingers. Lights out. Vikala was speechless. The weak point, a tiny, almost impossible to reach gap where the armored hide was thinnest. Only the most elite Selvian hunters even knew it existed. And this human had exploited it. She stared at him, struggling to form words. You are a liar. Jack smirked. I don't blame you for thinking that. But the evidence, he gestured to the dead Zarvok beside him, kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Vikala felt something deep inside her shift. Humans were not supposed to be like this. They were not supposed to be predators. And yet, here was one, sitting before her, proving everything she knew was wrong. Jack tilted his head. So, you gonna keep doubting me, or do you want to see how a real hunter works? Vikala did not know the answer. And that terrified her more than anything. The hunt begins. Vikala's mind refused to accept what she had just heard. Everything in her warrior's heart screamed impossible. That a human, a soft-skinned, tool-dependent species, had not only hunted a Zarvok, but killed it with nothing but a knife and cunning. And yet, the proof lay before her. The massive beast, its lifeless form stretched across the ground, its once feared fangs gleaming in the firelight. Its armored hide, which had withstood generations of Selvian weaponry, now bore a single fatal wound at the precise point that only master hunters even knew existed. The human had done it. And if that was true, then everything she had believed about her world's greatest predator, about her people, was now in question. Jack Mercer, this strange and infuriating human, leaned back against the rock, watching her with that same relaxed smirk. So, he said, breaking the silence, still think I'm lying? Vikala exhaled sharply, forcing her body to remain still. Her muscles, honed through years of battle, twitched with unease. She wasn't used to feeling uncertain, and she hated it. But warriors did not turn away from the truth. They faced it. She took a slow step forward, narrowing her gaze. If what you say is true, then prove it. Jack raised an eyebrow. Prove what? That I'm better than your people at hunting monsters. Vikala's jaw clenched. The arrogance of this creature. You got lucky, she said coldly. One kill does not make you a hunter. Jack's smirk widened. Oh. Vikala pointed toward the jungle, where the thick canopy swallowed the moonlight, leaving behind nothing but shifting shadows. Beyond those trees, she knew, the true wilds began. The Zarvok territory. Another one roams nearby, she said, voice measured. If you are as skilled as you claim, then hunt again. Jack tilted his head, considering. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp edges of a predator's grin. All right, he said, standing up and dusting himself off. You coming with me? Vikala stiffened. She had expected him to mock her challenge, maybe refuse, maybe try to twist words. But this, he had accepted it without hesitation. She forced herself to match his stare. I will watch, she said carefully. Nothing more. Jack chuckled. Sure, you just keep telling yourself that. And then, without another word, he turned and stepped into the darkness. Vikala exhaled, gripping the hilt of her blade, and followed. The hunt begins. The jungle swallowed them whole. The firelight faded behind them, replaced by absolute darkness. The thick canopy let in almost no moonlight, the towering trees forming a suffocating labyrinth of shadows. Vikala's eyes adjusted instantly. Her Excelvian vision allowed her to see in near pitch black. But Jack. She expected him to stumble, to hesitate, to struggle against the terrain. He did none of those things. Instead, he moved like a ghost, slipping through the undergrowth with unnatural silence. His breathing was steady, his steps calculated, his movements precise. Vikala frowned. Humans weren't supposed to be this graceful. She followed, keeping her distance, watching him carefully. He didn't walk like a soldier, nor like a scavenger. He walked like a hunter. Jack suddenly raised a hand, signaling her to stop. Vikala obeyed, her instincts kicking in. He had sensed something. She tensed, scanning the trees, her sharp eyes searching for movement. And then she heard it. A low, rumbling growl. It came from the shadows ahead. Deep, guttural, a warning from something massive. Vikala's blood ran cold. A second Zarvok. She reached for her weapon, ready to fight. But then she realized something. Jack hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, his breathing slow, his eyes locked onto the darkness ahead. Vikala frowned. What was he doing? Then she saw it. His hands. Empty. He had drawn no weapon. No knife. No blaster. Nothing. She whispered harshly, "Are you mad? It will kill you." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he crouched down, reaching for something on the ground. A rock. Vikala's eyes widened as she watched him lift it and toss it lightly into the trees ahead. It landed with the softest of thuds. The jungle fell silent. Then, a sudden blur of motion. The Zarvok lunged, faster than the eye could track. The beast pounced where the rock had landed, its massive claws tearing through the foliage. Vikala barely had time to process what had happened before Jack moved. He launched himself sideways, vanishing into the trees just as the Zarvok turned, its glowing red eyes scanning for prey. Vikala's heart raced. Jack had baited it. Not only that, he had read its movement pattern in mere seconds. The beast growled, sniffing the air. It hadn't found him, because Jack was already behind it. Vikala held her breath as she watched Jack move like a shadow, his steps eerily silent as he approached the beast's blind spot. He didn't charge, didn't rush. He waited. Vikala realized, with a strange sense of awe, that he was letting the Zarvok make a mistake. And then it happened. The beast snapped its head left, trying to pick up his scent, and in that instant, Jack struck. A blur of motion, a flash of steel. Jack's knife sank into the weak spot at the base of the Zarvok's skull, cutting through muscle and nerve. The beast let out a strangled cry, its massive form shuddering before it collapsed to the jungle floor. Dead. Vikala exhaled sharply, her fingers numb around her blade. Jack stood over the body, wiping his knife clean. He looked up at her, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips. "So," he said, voice calm, "still think it was luck?" Vikala didn't answer, because in that moment she realized something far more terrifying than the Zarvok. Humans weren't just survivors. They weren't just warriors. They were something else entirely. And for the first time in her life, Vikela wondered if her people had made a grave mistake in underestimating them. The truth about humans. Vikela had witnessed countless battles. She had fought alongside Selvian warlords, stood against the monstrous creatures of the wilds, and seen warriors rise and fall in the blood-soaked arenas of her people's greatest trials. Yet, nothing had prepared her for this. She stood frozen, her sharp golden eyes locked onto the lifeless form of the Zarvok sprawled before her. Its massive body, once a symbol of untouchable dominance, lay motionless in the undergrowth, its glowing red eyes now empty, its armored hide pierced by a single strike to the skull. And standing over it, as if he had done nothing special at all, was the human, Jack Mercer. His breathing was calm, his posture relaxed. He wasn't trembling with adrenaline, nor overwhelmed by the magnitude of his kill. He had hunted and killed the deadliest predator on this planet, twice, and he looked bored. Vikela felt something cold and unfamiliar creep up her spine. Fear. Not fear of the Zarvok. Not fear of death. Fear of the realization that this human was more dangerous than the creatures her people had feared for centuries. Jack cleaned his knife with practiced ease, then glanced at her, smirking. "You're staring again." Vikela snapped out of her trance, masking her unease with a hardened expression. "How?" she demanded, voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How can you do this?" Jack twirled his knife between his fingers before sheathing it. "Do what?" Her eyes narrowed. "No Xelvian has ever killed a Zarvok in single combat. We are faster, stronger, and yet..." She gestured to the beast at his feet. "You make it look effortless." Jack tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, slowly, he crouched next to the dead beast, resting an elbow on his knee. "Tell me something," he said casually. "Your people, what do they do when they see a predator like this?" Vikela frowned at the odd question. "We respect it," she answered firmly. "We study its patterns, learn its ways. We know our limits." Jack chuckled. "And that's the difference." She stiffened. "What?" Jack tapped his temple. "You see a monster and learn how to avoid it. Humans, we see a monster and learn how to kill it." Silence. The words hit harder than she expected. Because they were true. Her people had always seen the Zarvok as a force of nature, something to be feared, something to be respected from a distance. It was never meant to be prey. But Jack, he had flipped that belief upside down. "You think your people are strong," Jack continued, standing up and brushing the dirt off his hands. "And maybe you are, but you fight like prey." Vikala's eyes flashed with anger. "We are warriors." "Yeah," Jack nodded, "but warriors and predators aren't the same thing." She clenched her jaw, her grip on her blade tightening. "You speak as if humans are superior." Jack shrugged. "Not superior, just different." He stepped closer, his golden brown eyes meeting hers with unshakable certainty. "The difference between us, you were born strong. We had to become strong." Vikela felt her pulse quicken. There was weight in his words, a depth of truth she wasn't ready to admit. She had read about humanity, their history of survival, their wars, their rise from weak, fragile creatures to dominant apex predators. The Xelvians were a race of warriors. Humans. They were something else entirely. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "You still have not answered my question. How did you kill it?" Jack grinned. "All right, lesson time." The human way. Jack walked over to the fallen Zarvok, crouched down, and tapped its thick armored hide. "First mistake. You think strength is everything." Vikela crossed her arms. "Strength decides survival." Jack snorted. "Nope. Knowledge decides survival." He pointed at the beast's neck. "This thing could snap me in half in a second. So if I fought it on its terms, I'd be dead." He traced his finger along the Zarvok's spine. "See this ridge? Its armor plating is thickest here. Most people aim for the head, the chest, thinking they can break through. He glanced at her. Wrong. Vikala frowned, stepping closer. Then where did you strike? Jack pointed just below the base of the skull. Right here. The gap in the plating. A single well-placed strike shuts down the nervous system. She stared at the spot, barely visible even under the firelight. That weak point was so precise that even Selvian hunters barely managed to exploit it. Jack saw her expression and smirked. Yeah. We figure out weaknesses. It's what we do. Vikala felt something unsettling stir in her mind. Humans weren't faster than the Zarvok. They weren't stronger. But they thought differently. They adapted. You studied its movements, she murmured. Jack nodded, noticed how it hesitated before pouncing. That gave me just enough time to bait it. Vikala frowned. You let it think it was winning. Jack grinned. Exactly. See, most predators rely on instinct. They expect prey to react a certain way. But when you break that pattern, he made a motion with his hands. They hesitate. And that hesitation is all I need. Vikala felt her stomach twist. Her people prided themselves on their combat skill, their warrior spirit. But Jack had dismantled the deadliest creature on the planet without brute force. He had done it through understanding, through manipulation, through deception. That was true power. She met his gaze, a new emotion creeping into her voice. Are all humans like you? Jack laughed. Not all. Some are idiots, he shrugged. But the thing about humans, even the idiots can learn. That was the most terrifying part. Humans weren't the strongest species, but they didn't need to be. They just needed time. And if given enough time, they could become stronger than anything. Vikala's grip on her weapon loosened. She had always believed in the superiority of her people. She had been raised to see humans as reckless and insignificant. But now, staring at this lone human, standing unafraid in the heart of the jungle, 2 Zarvok kills behind him, she wasn't so sure anymore. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, had the Selvians underestimated humanity? Had they perhaps made a mistake? The betrayal and the test. Vikala should have left. Her duty was clear. She was a commander of the Selvian Empire, bound by honor and tradition. She had seen enough. She should have reported her findings to the High Command, told them about the humans' unnatural ability to outthink and outfight even the deadliest creature of their world. And yet she didn't move. She remained standing in the dark jungle, staring at the human named Jack Mercer, a man who should have been prey, but had proven himself to be something far more dangerous. The firelight flickered in his golden brown eyes, casting shadows that made him look almost inhuman. Vikala's grip on her weapon tightened. Why are you here? She asked at last. Jack tilted his head. You mean, why am I on your lovely death planet? She ignored the sarcasm. Yes. Jack exhaled and sat on a fallen log, resting his elbows on his knees. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Vikala narrowed her eyes. Try me. He studied her for a moment before sighing. I was sent here to die. Silence. Vikala's brow furrowed. Explain. Jack leaned back against the log, his voice strangely calm. A few months ago, I pissed off the wrong people. You ever hear of the Brathkar? Vikala stiffened at the name. The Brathkar Empire, a brutal, warlike species, ruthless conquerors who had clashed with the Selvian Empire for centuries. They were known for their merciless tactics, their ability to exterminate species that posed a threat. Jack smirked at her reaction. Yeah, thought so. Well, let's just say I had a little disagreement with their high warlord. Vikala frowned. Disagreement? Jack shrugged. I blew up his warship. Vikala's eyes widened. You did what? Jack laughed. Relax, I had help. Anyway, long story short, they didn't like that. Instead of killing me outright, they dumped me here, figuring your planet would finish the job. He gestured at the dead Zarvok. Guess they were wrong. Vikala's mind raced. The Brathkar didn't take chances. If they had gone through the trouble of exiling him instead of executing him, that meant they were afraid. Afraid of a human. Vikala didn't know what to make of that. "You should not be alive," she said, more to herself than to him. Jack grinned. "You keep saying that." Vikala took a slow breath, trying to suppress the strange, growing unease in her gut. Because deep down, she was starting to believe something impossible. Jack Mercer was not lucky. He was not reckless. He was something new. And that terrified her more than any beast in the wilds. The arrival. A sharp whistling sound cut through the silence. Vikala reacted instantly, lunging forward and slamming Jack to the ground just as a plasma bolt scorched through the air where his head had been. Jack grunted as they hit the dirt. "Damn, buy me dinner first." Vikala ignored him, her sharp eyes scanning the trees. More plasma fire. Steady. Precise. Military. Her stomach dropped. Zelvian warriors. Jack rolled to his feet, pulling out his knife as more figures emerged from the shadows. Vikala cursed under her breath. There were 7 of them, their armor gleaming under the dim moonlight, their weapons trained on Jack. One of them stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered Zelvian with scarred blue skin and cold, unyielding eyes. "Commander Tarak." Vikala's hands clenched. Jack glanced at her. "Friends of yours?" She didn't answer. Tarak's voice was a low growl. "Step away from the human, Vikala." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Aw, come on. We were just bonding." Tarak ignored him. His gaze locked on Vikala. "You were sent to scout the anomaly. Instead, we find you protecting it." Vikala forced her expression to remain neutral. "I was observing him." Tarak scoffed. "Observing? You've been out of contact for days, and now we find you standing beside an enemy." Jack muttered under his breath. "I feel very targeted right now." Tarak took a slow step forward, eyes narrowing. "The High Command wants him taken. Alive." Vikala felt something twist in her chest. Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "And what do you want?" She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Jack Mercer was a human. The threat. She should have let them take him. She should have stepped aside. And yet, the image of him hunting the Zarvok flashed in her mind. The way he had studied it, outsmarted it, defeated it. Jack Mercer wasn't just a human. He was something more. And if the High Command was afraid of him, if they wanted him gone, then maybe the real enemy wasn't him at all. Tarak raised his weapon. "This is your last warning, Vikala." Jack sighed. "Well, this is awkward." Vikala made her decision. She moved. Fast. Before Tarak could react, she grabbed Jack's wrist and yanked him back, drawing her blade in the same motion. Tarak's eyes widened. "What are you?" Vikala threw a plasma grenade at their feet. The explosion sent up a cloud of dirt and smoke, cutting off their line of sight. Jack barely had time to react before she grabbed him and ran. They sprinted into the jungle, dodging trees as plasma bolts tore through the darkness behind them. Jack laughed breathlessly. "You know, if you wanted me to run with you, you could have just asked." Vikala ignored him, her mind racing. She had betrayed her own people. She had chosen a human over her own empire. And there was no turning back now. Jack glanced at her as they ran, his expression both amused and impressed. "So, does this mean we're friends?" Vikala gritted her teeth. "Shut up and run." The apex war. The jungle blurred around them as Vikala and Jack ran for their lives. Plasma fire cut through the darkness behind them, scorching the trees and sending embers swirling into the night air. Vikala moved with silent precision, weaving through the thick foliage like a shadow. Jack followed, keeping pace, his breathing steady despite the relentless chase. They weren't running from beasts anymore. They were running from the Selvian Empire itself. Vikala's mind was racing. She had betrayed her people. She had turned her back on the high command, on the laws she had sworn to uphold. For a human. But as the jungle echoed with the battle cries of her former comrades, as plasma bolts sizzled past her head, she knew this wasn't just about Jack anymore. This was about what he represented. The truth. Jack Mercer had killed the apex predator of their world, something no Xeldian warrior had ever done. He had done it without strength, without speed, without being the superior species. He had done it by thinking differently, and a high command feared that. That was why they had sent a retrieval squad instead of assassins. That was why they wanted Jack alive. Because he was the proof that everything that Xeldians believed about power, about dominance, about their place in the galaxy, was a lie. And lies could only survive if the truth was silenced. The escape. Jack ducked under a low-hanging branch, his voice casual despite the chaos. So, any brilliant ideas? Vikela didn't answer. She was too busy scanning the terrain, searching for an escape. Then she saw it. A ravine up ahead, cutting deep into the jungle floor. Sharp rock walls. A narrow path winding along the edge. It was a death trap, which meant it was perfect. Vikela veered left. Follow me. Jack groaned. Every time you say that, I end up in more trouble. Then stop following me, she shot back. You first. They reached the ravine's edge just as a plasma bolt struck a tree beside them, sending shards of burning wood into the air. Vikela leaped forward, landing on the narrow trail just as the earth crumbled beneath her feet. Jack landed behind her, skidding to a stop as the ledge beneath them cracked. Okay, Jack muttered, glancing down at the sheer drop. This is a terrible idea. Vikela didn't disagree. They sprinted along the treacherous path, keeping their balance as the ravine stretched out below them. Behind them, the Xeldian soldiers hesitated. They wouldn't risk chasing them onto unstable ground, but they didn't need to. Because a second later, the unmistakable whine of a dropship engine roared overhead. Vikela cursed. They're calling in air support. Jack exhaled sharply. Yeah, that sounds bad. You have no idea. A dark shape loomed above them. A Xeldian hunter-class dropship, sleek and deadly, hovering over the ravine. The side doors slid open. Vikela's stomach sank. Elites. A squad of Xeldian Blackfang operatives, the deadliest warriors in the Empire, stepped onto the edge of the drop bay. Their weapons glowed in the darkness as they took aim. They weren't here to capture Jack anymore. They were here to end him. The turning point. Jack glanced at her. Tell me you have a plan. Vikela considered the terrain, the dropship, the soldiers. She had one plan. It was suicidal. But Jack had already proven that suicidal plans could work. She exhaled sharply. Jump. Jack blinked. Wait. What? She grabbed his arm. Jump. Now. Before he could argue, she dragged him off the ledge. The ravine swallowed them whole. Cold air rushed past them as they plummeted toward the river below. Jack let out a curse. I hate this plan. Vikela just closed her eyes and braced for impact. They hit the water hard, the force knocking the air from her lungs. The current dragged them under, spinning them through the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing, just the crushing weight of the river, the distant hum of the dropship engines above. Then, Vikela kicked hard, breaking the surface. Jack surfaced beside her, gasping for air. You are the worst guide I've ever had. Shut up and swim. They fought against the current, making their way to the riverbank as the dropship hovered above, searching for them. Vikela knew they had seconds before they were spotted. Jack pulled himself onto the shore, coughing. Okay, he panted, shaking water from his hair. Let's not do that again. Vikela ignored him, scanning the jungle. They needed a new plan. They couldn't keep running. They had to turn the tables, and she knew exactly how. She turned to Jack. We need to take that ship. Jack stared at her. You mean the heavily armed, full of murderous alien ship? She nodded. Jack sighed. I take back everything I said. I like this plan. The war begins. The jungle was no longer their enemy. It was their weapon. Vikela and Jack moved like ghosts, weaving through the undergrowth as the dropship's searchlights swept the riverbank. The Selvian elites were hunting them. But this time, they were the prey. Vikela pressed her back against a tree, signaling Jack to stay low. We take out the pilot first, she whispered. Then we deal with the rest. Jack smirked. Sounds fun. They waited, silent, invisible. The dropship descended. Jack drew his knife. Vikela unsheathed her blade. The war had just begun. The rise of the new apex. The jungle was alive with fire and steel. Plasma bolts tore through the trees, sending embers swirling into the night. The once silent wilderness had become a battleground, its towering canopy shattered by the roar of engines and the screams of war. And in the center of it all, a human and a Selvian warrior stood side by side, weapons drawn, ready to face the Empire itself. Vikela could feel her pulse hammering in her skull. Her breath came in slow, controlled bursts, her warrior instincts burning with focus. She had spent her life fighting for the Empire, hunting its enemies, enforcing its laws. Now she was its enemy. And beside her, standing with that infuriatingly calm smirk, was Jack Mercer, the human who had changed everything. Above them, the Selvian dropship hovered low, its searchlights cutting through the darkness. The Black Fang operatives, the Empire's most elite hunters, were closing in, their weapons primed, their orders clear. Kill the human. Kill the traitor. Vikela tightened her grip on her blade. Jack cracked his knuckles, glancing at her. So what's the plan? She exhaled sharply. We take the ship. Jack nodded. That's a great plan. He grinned. But how? Vikela looked at the dropship, calculating. The elites were scattered, still searching for them in the undergrowth. The pilot was in the cockpit, hovering low, ready to pick up survivors. There was one chance. We lure them in, she said. Take them out one by one. Then we take the cockpit. Jack whistled. So, kill a bunch of highly trained alien assassins, hijack their ship, and escape while an entire army is hunting us. She turned to him. You sound doubtful. Jack grinned. No, I love it. Let's do it. Vikela exhaled. He was insane. And somehow, that was reassuring. She raised her blade. Let's hunt. The last hunt. The first kill was silent. A Black Fang soldier stalked through the jungle, scanning the trees. His armor gleamed under the searchlights, his weapon sweeping the shadows. Vikela struck like a ghost. Her blade sliced through his throat, cutting off his scream. She caught his body, lowering it to the ground without a sound. Jack appeared beside her, watching with admiration. Remind me never to piss you off. She wiped her blade. Keep moving. They hunted the others like prey. Jack set traps, using the terrain against them. He lured one soldier into a pitfall, then dropped from the trees to finish him. Vikela used her warrior's speed, striking from the shadows, eliminating the enemy before they even realized they were being hunted. One by one, the Selvian elites fell, until only the pilot remained. Taking the ship, the dropship hovered low, unaware that its crew was already dead. Vikela and Jack moved fast, sprinting through the undergrowth. They'd reached the ship's ramp just as the pilot turned. Vikela threw her dagger. It struck home, embedding itself in the pilot's throat. The Selvian choked, eyes wide, before slumping over the controls. Jack whistled. You're scary. Vikela ignored him, grabbing the controls. The ship wobbled before stabilizing. She slammed the hatch controls, sealing them inside. Jack fell into the co-pilot seat. All right. Now what? Vikela's eyes burned with determination. Now, we take the fight to them. The final confrontation. The dropship soared through the jungle. breaking through the canopy and into the open sky. Below, Selvian forces scrambled to respond, their commanders barking orders, their fighters launching in pursuit. Jack looked at the sensors. "We've got company." Vikala gritted her teeth. "Let them come." The first pursuit craft locked on, its engines roaring. Plasma cannons charge, preparing to fire. Jack flipped a switch. The dropship banked hard, rolling through the air. The enemy shot wide, missing by inches. Jack grinned. "I have always wanted to fly one of these things." Vikala shot him a look. "Can you actually fly?" Jack smirked. "Nope." The ship dove toward the ground, skimming the treetops. The enemy craft followed, their weapons firing wildly. Vikala activated the ship's defense turrets, locking onto the pursuers. With a single press, the sky exploded. Flames engulfed the enemy ships, sending them spiraling into the jungle below. Jack whooped. "Now that's what I call a comeback." Vikala didn't smile. She was already looking ahead, toward the distant horizon, toward the Selvian capital, where the High Command was waiting. Jack followed her gaze. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" She nodded. "We end this. The war begins." The Selvian Empire had spent centuries believing itself to be the apex predator of the galaxy. But predators don't stay on top forever. Jack Mercer had proven that even the strongest can fall. And now, with a stolen warship, an arsenal of stolen weapons, and a warrior who had once been one of their own, it was time to show the Empire that humans weren't just prey. They were the new apex predators. And the hunt was just beginning.